Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So today we are actually going to talk about red dots and go through some basic fundamentals of running your first red dot. So I get this question a lot, and we have yet to build a curriculum for red dot pistols, but that is something that's going to be coming to our training grounds here as actually a curriculum to teach people the fundamentals of red dot. But as of right now, I thought, well, let's just get a video out and let's talk about how to go from 0 to hero with your red dots. So the first things that we need to be doing with those red dots, and so in general, we have to start with the mounting. And so the mounting of the red dots is not necessarily a obvious thing because we see it done incorrectly a lot. The last class I ran, actually every single red dot in that class failed in some capacity, whether they didn't have Loctite on the screws for the battery case, or they didn't Loctite or rock set the screws in place for the actual firearm, or for the actual attachment to the firearm, or they're using a plate, which is generally just a substandard way of doing it. Some pistols you don't have an option, but certainly when you have an option, we want to mount that red dot directly to the slide, right? Because we're taking away points of friction, points of failure in there. Whenever we put a plate on there, we have 2 additional screws or 4 additional screws, depending on how it's mounted. We raise that optic up a little bit, and it just creates this this paradigm where the dot can get loose. Now, even my dot being mounted correctly works loose periodically, and so my dot has rock set in there. I've had the rock set come loose because what happens is the gun heats and expands as it's firing, and so those screws eventually do get loose. So I actually had to tighten these down last night when I was doing some dry fire practice, because when I would click, when I pull the trigger on the dry fire, I'd start seeing the dot shift. I was like, what the hell is going on? And so what we're going to do is that the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and actually confirm 0 with this gun. Now, they don't typically lose 0 when that happens, so it's not generally a huge deal, but we're going to go ahead and start with a good confirmation 0. Now, I generally confirm 0 at 25 yards. I'm a little bit further today. I'm sitting at about 33 yards, but as a general rule, 25 yards seems to be a good confirmation 0 for a red dot. Some people do it closer, some people do it a little bit further. 25 yards is generally kind of the accepted standard that I use. I'm a big fan of that method because it seems to work dot on target for anywhere closer and even up to a little bit further. So 25 yards seems to keep me on 0 or on target at going out to about 50 yards and into 3 yards. So that's when I use a 25 yard 0. You can use whatever you want. There's different ballistic charts out there, just like there are for rifles. There's ballistic charts for pistols and for different calibers and length barrels and everything. But again, now you guys know I use typically a little bit smaller frame pistols. I like compact size guns, which is like your Glock 19s, your MR 920s, your M&P compacts and stuff like that. So I typically use compact size guns even for outside the waistband duty carry guns. I like this size gun a little bit better. So this is typically what I use. You may find slightly different ballistics if you're using a longer barrel, using a compensator and stuff like that. So figure out exactly what you need to do. But like I said, for me, 25 yards is typically how I stick my 0. So let's go ahead and 0 this gun. And then we're going to go over some drills today. We're going to show you exactly what we need to do to start getting this gun on target, because we have a lot of issues with people looking over the dot. They can't find the dot. Stuff like that happens. And it's just the first kind of issues that you will deal with running a red dot. So you can see my point of aim was right here at the A. Obviously, I dropped that last shot there, but we're way over now. So it's actually a lot further than I expected that to be. So let's go ahead and adjust our sight and move this back in. Now that we got a confirmed 0, we're back on now. It took me a minute, but not too long. It took me about 9 shots or so to get us on target and on 0. So it was a little bit more off than what I was expecting. So that's our first step. We want to make sure that our 0 is good. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and just retorque those screws just a little bit to make sure everything is nice and tight. But when we mount those optics on there, there's lots of ways to mount these optics, but really what you should be doing is, if you're going to go ahead and mount your own optic, is a lot of those screws will come with Loctite on them, and blue Loctite or something like that. And that stuff is okay. Typically what I do is I will take alcohol swabs, I'll clean the holes real good, I'll clean the screws real good, and I generally prefer to use rock set rather than using the Loctite, because rock set seems to hold up a little bit better in the heat. But let's go ahead and take our our fixed at 6 here. And we're going to go ahead and re-torque these down. Now, most of the torquing on these is going to be about 15, 15 inch-pounds? Yeah, 15 inch-pounds, 15, 20 inch-pounds on the screws. And so that tends to be kind of the standard on these. So your specific manufacturer will tell you if you need more than that or less than that or however it needs to be. But all mine are 15 inch-pounds. So as a side note, a couple things. One, ignore my my sandbag here. I'm using just a rack of water bottles. But what I want to mention to you guys is these fix-it sticks. I wasn't a huge fan of spending the money on these before I got an Optic. Once you get an Optic, these are pretty useful to have in your range bag. So I would recommend, I know they're expensive, but get the fix-it sticks. Not necessarily, they have a humongous one that does like everything for $400. This one was like $185 or so. This one's the Glock specific one, which works for my 1911s, my Glocks, everything that I need to do. So I typically use this one. Now, before we go out to the range and work some different drills and some different fundamentals, let's discuss some things specifically about using optics. One of the issues that we run into is, and it happens with iron sights too, is that people end up looking at the top of the slide. This is real common with people that want to run Glocks, that grip angle doesn't naturally line up with your presentation, right? So your presentation, you end up looking at the top of it. And when I see people like that, sure, you can train that out. I've shot Glocks for years, and you can, to a certain extent, train that out. But for me, it's easier to actually pick a firearm that lines up with that grip angle, and then I don't have to worry about it. So when I draw a 1911, my 1911, I am on every single time that I extend out because that's where my grip naturally wants to be. And so I don't have to think about it. So that's the reason that I don't typically shoot a lot of Glocks anymore, or Glock-ish pistols. You got PSA daggers and shadow systems and Zevs and stuff like that now. But I don't typically shoot a lot of Glock grip angle pistols anymore because of that grip angle. Now, this happens to be a Shadow Systems MR920, so it uses the Glock grip angle. So I'm training with that just like anybody else that wants to use this platform. And so I'm having to work back on getting that Glock grip angle again, because I've gone to this for competitions now, and so I'm shooting red dots in competitions, and so now we've got to go back to a little bit of fundamentals. So what I would encourage you to look at is, if that grip angle does not naturally rest for you, look at different pistols that do. There are plenty of quality brands out there that are not Glock that have other grip angles that may work better for you. Or if you're using something like a 1911 and you find yourself looking over the sights every time where that sight has dipped down, then maybe you want to actually look at a Glock, because that Glock grip angle may be a little bit more natural for you. So I'm not a huge person on pick the gun that feels right in your hands. I've never been one of those, been in that category of thought process anyways. But when it comes to grip angles seem to be about the hardest thing to train in and out of people. And so when it comes to grip angles, it's the one time that I'll tell you, you need to pick the one that naturally presents well for you. You will always be faster with it. Case in point, even with an Optic, even with training with an Optic for months now, I am still faster with a 1911 with an iron sight than I am with a Glock with a dot, okay? It's simply because of that grip angle, because I don't find myself looking for the dots or the sights or anything along those lines. And so dots tend to magnify that problem. And that's the issue that we run into with red dots, is that where you say, well, I've been doing it fine with iron sights for years, and so I should be good with my Glocks now with a red dot on there. But the problem is that over the years, you've been adjusting to it with the iron sights, but when we swap to an Optic on there, that Optic, because there's not two focal points on the gun anymore, right? We just have one focus point. We lose the front sight and the rear sight. We now just have this one focal point on there. It tends to magnify that issue. And so that's where I really want you to focus on, it is first picking a gun that lines up with your draw stroke very naturally, so that we're not always fighting against it. It's a fight that's not really worth having, and something that we don't need to put ourselves through when there's plenty of good quality firearms out there. MMPs are a great option. The SIG 365, SIG 320, those are great options. I like 2011s a lot. Those are great options. There's lots of good pistols out there, some in the price range of Glocks, some well beyond the price range of Glock, but don't, because so many people fall into the category of I have to have a Glock, it has to be a Glock, you run into this issue that you have people that really should be looking at other firearms, but they refuse to look at them because, well, they've been using Glock for so long and the Glock has worked for them, but now that they're running a red dot, it amplifies that issue of their grip angle. Okay, so first thing is you may have to be honest with yourself and look at a different pistol to truly be able to effectively use that dot well. Again, it doesn't mean that you can't train it out, because it is absolutely a training issue, but it means that you're training against what your body wants to do naturally, which is generally not advisable in training. We generally want to do what our body naturally wants to do. This is why Krav Maga is such an effective art form, our martial art form, is because Krav Maga starts us, right, you don't start from like a fighting stance, you start from a passive stance or a semi-passive stance, because that's what we're naturally going to end up doing in real life. Sorry, you guys got a bee floating around my my camera right now. So let's head out to the range. Let's do a few drills on working on how to draw and present so that we're not stuck looking for that dot all the time. Okay, so when it comes to actually drawing our pistol and presenting, this is the biggest issue that we have, is people sit there like this trying to find their dot. And where I'm really trying to get you to is I'm trying to get you to, as soon as I draw it out, my dot is actually in line with that target. And so the way that we do that, Glocks are a little bit different. So when you're talking about a Glock grip angle, we tend to point with our thumbs first rather than actually pointing the barrel. The barrel tends to be more of a natural extension, because when we draw our gun, we have our finger there. And so we're actually pointing our finger on other pistols. But on Glocks, we tend to actually point our thumbs. And so pointing your thumbs will tend to get you online. Now, one thing that I would encourage you to do in practice and in training is actually put a piece of tape over that optic on there and aim it with the top of the optic. And that'll actually start getting you to where your presentation actually works to where I'm looking at the top of the optic rather than through the optic. Now, there's some people that will tell you when it's close range, aim with the top of the optic anyways. And so they'll tell you to draw and use it, put the top of your optic on the sight or on the target and fire. I don't agree with that method. I think that as a general rule, you should always have a sight picture when you're firing, even in defensive situations. I've never agreed with the idea that if my dot goes down, I'm just going to put the bad guy in the center of it and fire. I'm going to take well-aimed shots. I don't agree with that. There's lots of evidence to suggest that we should not be training that way. We should not be fighting that way. And so we can go into that in a separate video. So what I'm going to do though is, in a training aspect, as I'm trying to get used to that draw stroke, is I'm going to go ahead and put a piece of tape over that optic on there. And so my first thing is that I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a bunch of dry fires. So I'm going to do 10 dry fires, aiming at the top of the sight, right? And you can see I don't have tape on mine right now, but I'm not looking down the optic. I'm just drawing, aiming at the top of the sight. And then as I draw, I aim at the top of the sight, and then I take a second look through that optic and I'm looking at the red dot on there, or in my case, a green dot, okay? So I'm gonna do 10 dry fire strokes just like that, okay? And when I'm doing those dry fire strokes, I'm doing what's called a hog drill. So my hands on grip. So I'm not leaving, I'm not coming down and drawing and getting out, because then we're adding in more points of failure in this drill. And so what I really wanna do is I wanna start with a hog drill. So hand on grip, okay, stand by, boom, I'm on, okay? Stand by, on. Okay, so each time, and I'm bringing my gun up to my non-dominant hand up here and right in front of my face and extending straight out, okay? So the problem is one of the issues that we see is people end up doing the bowling technique, and so they come up and then they really can't find their dot. So I want to come here and straight out. That's my draw stroke, okay? So then after we get that mastered, right, and it takes a lot of repetitions to get this mastered, after we get this mastered, then we start adding in actually drawing the pistol out and then aiming down the sight. You will find for right-handed shooters, your dot will typically be a little bit to the left of the screen, and so that's fairly common. So when you draw, you have to move your gun to the right, and that is the inverse for left-handed shooters. Left-handed shooters, they'll have a tendency of having the dot off to the left, and they have to draw and move the dot back over to the right. Fairly common, but we need to get the dry fire repetitions in to where our dot is automatically on every time. So I'm aiming my thumbs, I'm putting the top of that red dot right on my sight, and then I'm firing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work this drill. I'm going to do 5 dry fire practices, okay? 5 or 10, okay? Right hand on grip, okay? Till I get 5 in a row where I'm on sight, okay? If I draw it and it's not on, then I start over, okay? And then my last one that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and fire. So I'm going to draw, fire, okay? Now, if I'm not in that down 0 zone, so I like IPSC or IDPA targets, if I'm not in that down 0 or that A zone, then that's a failed drill, okay? So in that case, I'm going to start over. I'm going to do 10 more, okay? 5 to 10 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay? So I'm on each time. So now I'm going to draw it again, okay? and I'm dead on my A zone or my down 0 zone on my target, okay? So that's the first drill that we're gonna run through. We're gonna do this a lot of times so that we get that repetition, so that way each time we draw, we're on. So that one I failed, I didn't hit my dot on it, okay? So now I'm gonna draw again, okay, now I'm on 2, there's 2, okay, because we had a failed on our first one. 3, 4, 5, on, okay? So that's the drill that I'm working. So once complete with that, once we've done some repetitions of that drill, then we're gonna start doing the same drill and we're gonna decrease the size of our target. So now I'm gonna aim at the head zone of that target. And so I really wanna be in that smaller A zone. So I've gotta slow my draw down a little bit. Okay, so A zone 1, A zone 2, A zone 3, A zone 4, A zone 5, and then now I'm going to draw it. Again, I'm going to go nice and slow, okay? And my target, actually, I think my sight needs to be a little bit adjusted up, so we're going to hit that. But anyway, so that's the goal that I'm looking at. So A zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'm going to slow that down a little bit. After I'm done with that, then at this point in time, I'm going to go to a relaxed position, right? So not in a fighting stance or not hand on grip. At this point in time, okay, so my draw stroke is going to be complete with the step. So draw stroke 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and each time I'm on, so now I'm good for my 6th shot. I'm gonna break a shot, okay, and I'm in my A zone again. So that's what I'm really trying to look at. I'm really trying to build that consistency. When you fail, when you're outside of that A zone, when we're not getting that dot on and those dry fires, we start the 5 over again, 5 or 10, like I said, depends on how much ammo you want to go through that day. So I tend to do 5 because doing that 10 times in a row, I start getting antsy to pull my trigger. So that's the first drill that we're going to do. Now the second drill that we're going to end up doing is we're going to work on target transition. So I want to be able to keep that dot while I rotate between targets. And that's another issue that we run into, is that I lose my dot when I'm rotating. And so I really want to focus my rotation on my shoulders and on my hips rather than on the gun, because if I move the gun, then what I end up doing is actually chasing that dot down. And so as an exaggerated position, my gun goes like this as I'm moving, okay? So that's really what I'm trying to avoid, because then I've got to try to find that dot again. So what I want to do when I'm doing my transition is I actually want to keep my dot the whole time and not lose it. So I'm rotating with my hips and with my shoulders more than I am the actual firearm, okay? So that's how we do the same drill whether we're doing with an optic or with iron sights. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing, right? So I'm going to start with a relaxed position. Go ahead and draw. I'm going to add that first thing in. So that's my first my draw stroke includes that first iteration of my dry fire for the draw. Okay, so I'm on the target. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and then I'm back in. All right, so back to a relaxed position. 1, 2, 3. And I'm rotating at my hips and my shoulders. So now, okay, so we've done 5. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I'm back to a relaxed position. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I wanted to do a complete one without the interruption of the empty mag. Okay, so now I'm going to do the exact same thing again, right? I'm going to draw, dry fire. 1, 2, 3. Back in. 1, 2, 3. Let's just say we did 5. 1, 2, 3. Okay, all A zone hits, so I'm good there. Now I can start backing up that distance, working on these same drills. So we have steel over there, so I'm going to do this actually using a little bit of steel because I like the noise of the steel, right? It always adds a little bit of fun. But that's where we're really going to start. If I can get that draw stroke to where my sight is on each time, and I can get that draw stroke to where target transition to where my sight is on each time, then we can add in some iterations, right? Because we have to do one-handed shooting drills. As much as I'm not a fan of one-handed shooting drills, we do have to do them. And so I'm going to do the same thing, drawing. Okay, I lost my dot there. Okay, so I'm going to start over. So draw. 1, 2, 3. So you can see when I do one-handed drills, my gun is cockeyed a little bit more, so it's a little bit harder for me to get on there, okay? So I don't like the presentation I had on any of those. I was on, but barely, so I'm going to start it over, actually. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm on. Now I can do the same thing with my left hand. Now obviously I'm not drawing from my left hand, so I'm going to start at a low ready position. So my left hand, I'm going to get my dot. Okay, I'm right there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Now that one popped out of the A zone. I pulled the shot a little bit, so that one doesn't count. So now we got to start all over, right? So we're going to start back over with our 5 iterations. Okay, so the point of this is to force you to focus on those dry fire techniques, right? So I draw out, I'm on target, draw out on target, right? I can do all my, I can intermix these drills a little bit. So I'm going to go back to doing a target transition drill. And so each time I draw it, I'm actually going to take that step back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. And we're out of ammo. So let's go back and reload. Okay. So now I'm going to back this up, and again, I'm going to tighten up my accuracy a little bit. I'm going to do the exact same drill, right? So we're going to start going from relaxed position. So I'm going to draw, aim, and I'm right on the head, 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 okay? So I'm doing the exact same thing, but I'm tightening up the shot grip. So I have to slow it down just a little bit. Head, 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 okay? So that's 2 iterations, 1, 2, 3, okay? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, now realize we can add a lot of other drills in the same drill. I can start moving while I'm doing these firing, right? I can slide back and forth, so I can start getting myself used to moving and shooting while I'm doing these. I'm probably not going to do this while I'm aiming at the headshots, but I can go 1, 2, 3, right? Draw again. 1, 2, 3. Draw again. Step 1, 2, 3. Okay, I can do this any capacity that I want to, whether I'm moving forward or backwards, side to side, whatever it is. So 1, 2, 3. Draw again. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I can do these drills in any capacity that I want. The goal is to get that optic to where it becomes second nature every time that we draw it. So the only way to get there is for us to actually do a lot of dry fire and a lot of live fire. So the reason we're bringing in that dry fire is because that allows us to avoid the mistakes that we make from flinching and stuff like that. And so it gets that good presentation without wasting through a bunch of ammo. So I want to conserve ammo, right? Because unless you have unlimited funds to buy a bunch of ammo, I want to conserve some ammo. So dry fire is an incredibly useful tool. Now we're not really dry firing because we're not pulling the trigger, but we're still doing that same drill. And we can go ahead and unload if we want to pull that trigger. Let's do this again. Oh, I'm already full. Okay. So I can do that same drill and actually pull my trigger. 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And then now I want to go ahead and go live. 1, 2, 3. Okay, guys, so that's the start of how we start working on our red dot pistols. Now I'm going to go and do a couple of these drills, and I'm going to work through them here for an hour or so, but that's really what we want to focus on. We want to focus on getting that dot, that presentation correct every time. Now, like I said, if I have my druther, I'd have one of my 2011s milled, and I would end up putting this dot on my 2011. I don't have unlimited funds. I had the gun. It's already cut for a red dot. I put the red dot on this one. So, and it's important that we know how to fight with more than just our favorite firearms, right? As Musashi says, we shouldn't have a favorite weapon. So it's kind of that idea. So I want to know how to fight with a Glock, even though I don't carry a Glock necessarily, right? I want to know how to fight with a 1911, even if I don't carry a 1911. So focus on using guns that you're maybe not comfortable with. Get yourself comfortable with presenting those dots every single time. Okay. Lastly, let's talk about the reasons for red dots. And so I hear this all the time. People say, well, I don't need a red dot, I can shoot. Well, so can I. That's an irrelevant fact. The simple matter of the fact is that red dots are faster than iron sights. They are faster for everybody that is willing to train at a red dot. Now, like I said, I am actually faster with my iron sights on my 2011 than I am with a Glock with red dots, but that doesn't mean that I wouldn't be faster if I spent time training with the Glock with red dots. Simple fact is that red dots are a hugely beneficial thing if you're willing to train. Red dots require more practice to stay in line, to stay in with your training. Do I carry one every day? No, because I don't like having a red dot on my carry gun, because carry guns get beat up, they get dirt in them, they get lint in them, they get rained on and all sorts of other crap. And so it makes the red dots not quite as reliable as what I would like them to be for a defensive carry gun. That doesn't mean that they're not adequate weapons or weapon systems, weapon platforms to put on a carry gun, especially if you're using closed emitter sights. So I'm a big fan of using red dots, but you have to practice with them. You have to use them. The other benefit that red dots have is when your eyesight starts aging, red dots bring in a whole new category of what you're able to shoot. My dad can't hardly shoot anymore without his glasses on. Well, if an intruder comes in with that he can't, well, I shouldn't say he can't see anymore, but he can't see that up close of those sights. He can, however, pick up a red dot. So if an intruder were to come in, he can identify the intruder, but he may not be able to see his iron sights. A red dot takes that away from him and allows him to actually use his firearm again. So my advice is that everybody that wants to be serious about carrying a gun should train with a red dot, even if you don't carry one on you. You notice I'm training with a red dot, even though I don't carry a red dot necessarily, because at some point in time, my eyesight is going to get bad enough, especially that close distance, right, that reading glass distance, that I'm going to need that red dot and I'm going to need that training. It's a lot easier to do that now when I'm in my 30s versus doing it when I'm in my 60s and 70s, right? So go ahead and start working on the training with those. Red dots are absolutely the way of the future for pistols, and so you're going to see them becoming more and more common. BJ Norris one time told me that he thinks in 10 years from now that you won't even have to be able to buy a pistol without a red dot, or at least an optic cut. And I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's his opinion on it, and he certainly would be in a lot of the know on these things. So start focusing on that red dot training, start learning how to use red dots effectively, and understand how they are mounted, because that is part of it. You will have to unmount and remount your red dot. It's part of life. You will have it come loose. You will need to tighten it down. You'll need to replace batteries on certain models like RMRs where you have to remove it to replace the battery. You'll need to understand how those red dots get mounted. Don't just leave it to the gunsmith and be done with it. I have seen more dots fail from gunsmiths that mounted it than I probably have individual students that mounted it. So take my advice on how to mount them, but there's plenty of videos that'll show you all in detail how to mount these red dots with people that really know what they're doing. So understand how to mount that red dot and how to work with it, but then start really practicing with it and get some training on using red dots. Like I said, we're going to be adding a red dot course here. So when that red dot course does come out, we'll show you guys very effectively how to use these, how to employ them, and how to start with those red dots. And even if you're a little bit more experienced, how to improve your training on them and really get you to that next level that you're looking for getting to. Now, I would advise you guys, if you really want to get to the next level, go start shooting competitions with them. That'll make you, that'll humble you certainly, but really start showing you what you need to be doing to get those red dots where you need to be. Thanks again for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. We'll talk to y'all later.